Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another episode of the Raw Prospect Podcast. Today, we are recapping what has happened in round one of the NBA playoffs so far. One of my favorite times of the year, we get the playoff fallout of so many teams losing, what it means for them. We're going to get into that, but also just break down some of the series so far. We have uh, one series tied at 2 games apiece, a few at 3-1 that we think will be in the books here pretty soon. But we're going to get into all of it. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like on the video. We really like it's free and easy to do in one tap, and it really does help us grow our channel. And subscribe as well if you enjoy our content. But joining me from Houston, Texas, the Stat King himself, Mr. Michael Wein. How you doing?
Doing well. Welcome in, everybody. On a Monday night, we are over halfway through the first round of the NBA playoffs. We're going to get into every single series, and each conversation will kind of vary. Some series, two are already finished up with the Thunder sweeping the Pelicans. That finished up tonight, and the Timberwolves sweeping the Suns. We'll talk more probably about what it means for those teams that lost. Their season's over now. But we're also going to get into some of these other series that are still going on. So I hope you guys enjoy. As Emmy said, leave a like. Tell us who your favorite team is. Tell us, what you expect them to achieve if they're not yet already knocked out. And we'll go from there. But let's go ahead and jump right in.
Yeah, I think to start off here, let's start with a couple of the Eastern. Or wait, you actually had the order set and prepared. Let's go with that. Sorry, I forgot.
Well, I think my first series was Timberwolves and Suns. So we
Okay,
can go ahead and start there since that series is already
Oof.
finished up.
Well, for one, um, I don't think we made predictions going into the first round, like on
No.
our podcast. But if we did, I probably would have picked the Suns in this matchup. And I'll just say it right here. I'll say it. I'll put my hand up and just say like I was dead wrong about Minnesota and their defense translating to the playoffs, but not only translating but elevating in the playoffs. And also what Anthony Edwards is doing right now puts them in a whole different stratosphere as possible contenders. 31, 8-7 on 65% true shooting. That's just simply a different player than who we saw in the regular season. It just is. And it's not only that, but also the maturity. Like it's making the right read. Like they're getting good offense out of him initiating. And he's 22 years old. You expect him to be to not be as sharp in terms of making the correct read every single time, but he is. He's on top of it. And I just got to credit him. I got to credit, Chris Finch, that coaching staff. And it just seems like we're seeing a superstar rise, man. It's amazing to watch. And I just think before I say anything about the Suns, I just had to just give the Timberwolves their props. Gobert has been fantastic. I think this is the best version of Gobert we have seen, just maybe in his entire career. I think like him giving you, a very impactful, 16 points, 12, 13, 14 rebounds. But also the elite defense and also getting it done on the perimeter as well. Like the Suns have been kind of baited into, oh, I have Gobert on me. That's a matchup. No, it's not. No, it's not. And he proved it over and over again. He was out in space with some of these guys, and he didn't just hold his own. He showed why he's one of the best defenders of this generation.
The first thing stands out to me, which we knew going in, but was reinforced, was Minnesota's defense. They were the best defense in the league for most of the season. And in this 4-game sweep, and this was a big reason they ended up winning this series, of course. And we'll talk about Phoenix probably extensively, more so than we do Minnesota. We'll actually talk more about Minnesota when we get to their possible, I guess, their second round matchup's not really set yet. But down the road, we'll talk more about them. Back to my original point. When Phoenix's big three was on the court, Durant, Beal, and Booker, Minnesota held them in 125 minutes with those guys on the court to 106.8 points per 100 possessions, which would have been tied with the last place offense in the regular season, the Memphis Grizzlies, for worst in basketball. That's how good this Minnesota defense was in this series, and we saw it from pretty much everybody. I thought that Jaden McDaniels, next to Anthony Edwards, at times in this series was like the second most important player on the floor for Minnesota. He was fantastic on the perimeter and disrupting action, blocking shots down low, helping Rudy Gobert in rim protection. And they just stifled Phoenix. And they stifled them to a point where I even didn't think they would be able to stifle Phoenix. So give credit to them there. As you mentioned, we can't talk about this series without talking about the efforts of Anthony Edwards. I think we're seeing the rise of a minimum top 10 player in basketball from here moving forward. I don't know exactly where I would slot him right now, but he basically took Minnesota to their first playoff series win in 20 years. Their last playoff series win came in 2004, and he averaged 31 points doing it on efficient shooting, 65% true shooting, as you mentioned, 8 rebounds. I mean, he was just all over the place. And coming into tonight, he actually led the playoffs in fourth quarter scoring. When the game slows down, when defenses get tougher and these games become more competitive, he was great in the fourth quarter. Trying to think if there's anyone else. Cat did cat things. And look, I mean, at the end last night, I kind of felt like everything was falling apart a little bit. Anthony Edwards is holding his ankle. He's had some ankle issues here lately. Hopefully, the good thing is with the sweep, he'll have time to kind of rest up and recover. And then Chris Finch at the end with, I think it was Mike Conley running into him. That was rough. Never seen that before, but hopefully Chris Finch is okay, because as Anthony Edwards said on his post-game interview with the TNT crew last night, the Inside the NBA guys, that guy could easily be the coach of the year. And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's more to be said right now about Phoenix. And so I want to get your general thoughts on, boy, to me, it looks pretty bleak for Phoenix, given where they have their roster right now and the lack of assets, I should say, that they have. But I want to get your thoughts on the series, and then where do you kind of see them moving into the off season?
Yeah, we talked about when the Bradley Beal trade was made, kind of the idea of new owner syndrome, which is a new owner buys the team, is kind of fresh faced, wants to make a mark, wants to put the franchise on the map or back on the map, whatever the case is, and make a splash. And that's what Matt Ishbia just immediately did. Goes out and okays the trade for Kevin Durant, which was a lot of assets, but it's Kevin Durant. That makes sense. And then in the offseason, okays the trade for Bradley Beal, and that's where I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I remember when we were discussing it, like we questioned the fit there. The talent is fantastic, but basketball is a sport where it's not 2K. Like in order for things to be the sum of its parts, they have to be they have to have a certain synergy in order for that to be the case, and that just was never there. And you could accredit that to injuries. You could accredit that to you know whatever you want. But the bottom line is this was the scenario of it going bad. Like what happened, what we saw here was the worst it could have been, I think. And it looked like they had kind of given up on Frank Vogel. It looked like they just weren't really listening to him. Like I remember opening tip, Jared Greenberg is talking over the mic and talking about what Vogel said to him and basically said Vogel wants the Suns to shoot 43s. They didn't get close to that in any of these games. It just didn't seem like they um were bought in and for they had the belief in Vogel, I think. And it's not a Vogel thing. It's not Vogel's fault. The players just didn't get it done, but um things just did not it went horribly wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to try to keep this brief, but to build off what you were saying, I thought you made a great point. I thought Phoenix's shot selection was in their offensive approach this series, for whatever reason. It could be a number of things. It was kind of antiquated. And you mentioned the lack of 3-point volume. Well, to build off that point, look, there's nothing wrong with some mid-range jumpers that are put up by dead-eye mid-range shooters that they have. I mean, Booker can get it done, Durant, Beal. They all can do that. And there's nothing wrong with a get-to-the-rim mentality in the playoffs that leverages the spacing that you create by having the personnel that the Suns have. And look, they weren't really helped by the fact that Grayson Allen was dealing with his own thing, his own ankle injury. But this team should not have finished with the postseasons to this point second lowest 3-point rate, because that's where they sit. And it just didn't feel like they were able to get the shots that they wanted from out there. They didn't take those shots when they did get them. The Wolves got up 7.5 more 3-point attempts per game in this series than Phoenix did. That tells the entire story, in my opinion. Durant, as we know, is one of the best outside shooters of all time. And he launched 8 non-corner threes and 30 long twos in this series. And I just don't think that disparity can happen in the year of 2024. It's kind of like having a brick oven for a pizza and then deciding to heat your pizza with a single match. It's like, what are you doing? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
On top of that, I mentioned Minnesota's defense, and that absolutely plays into this. But coming into the playoffs, Phoenix's offensive rating when Durant, Booker, and Beal shared the court was 120.5. And it was 125.8 in the 46 minutes those guys shared the court in regular season matchups against Minnesota. In 3 regular season matchups. As I mentioned earlier, it was 106.8 per 100 possessions in the 125 minutes they played in the postseason. And someone can take that and absolutely chalk that up to small sample size against a bona fide title contender that really ratcheted up the intensity come playoff time in all the important ways that you typically see in the postseason. But even I think that might be just a little bit disingenuous. I feel like what happened in this series is grounds for possibly a breakup. But that's where things get weird with this Suns offseason. You could argue the least effective member of their trio, Bradley Beal, he's got a no trade clause, and that does not help them. Because his first season in Phoenix was kind of a nightmare, even kind of worse than I thought it could be, and I didn't think it was a great fit.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, going back to whenever that trade happened, they just couldn't develop any workable chemistry together. There were injuries here and there, and if you look at Phoenix's situation, they've got, I believe, one first round pick in this upcoming draft, which is like in the 20s. And then their next first round pick would come in 2031, I believe. So they really don't have any assets. They don't have cap space because they're over the second tax apron. And so they can't use their mid level exception. I don't think they can take any money back in trades or whatever the rule is. So they're in a tough spot. Like, nobody from that team that was up 2-0 in the finals just 3 short years ago, except for Devin Booker, is still in Phoenix. You talk about Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, everybody that you think of, they're no longer here. And so it's going to be a weird offseason. I feel like I don't know what they're going to have to do to rectify things. I feel like even if they have the perfect offseason and are able to convince somebody to come in on like the vet men and play point guard for them, maybe a Kyle Lowry or someone of that nature, a Monte Morris. I don't know who the free agents are in this cycle, but even if they do that, like even if they're able to get a couple guys on the cheap, there's still no guarantee that if you run it back with these 3 guys that you make the playoffs next year with as strong as the West is, and some of the teams that could be better next year that didn't make the playoffs this year. And so I don't know, they're in a tough spot. I don't need to I know I went on a rant there, but let's move on.
No. I mean, everything you said was, completely relevant and needed to be said. So, okay, I think that's enough for that series. We'll get into more off-season talk when that time comes, but we'll also get into Timberwolves, as you said, a little bit deeper once the round 2 gets a little bit closer. But
it's funny because my next series on our list was Thunder and Pelicans. And so these are the 2 series that have already wrapped up as of this moment. In a couple hours, we could have another series wrapped up. So your thoughts on Thunder and Pelicans, which ends in a 4-0 sweep for the 1 seed in the West?
Well, I got to be honest. I got to preface this by saying I didn't watch this series as closely as a lot of the other series. But from what I did watch, here's what I took away. The Thunder defense is legit. Like, it's not going away. Like, they have the personnel to be a top defense in the playoffs, like legitimately. And this isn't just like a young team that's gonna, their defense is just gonna fall off a cliff. Like, no. Their defense is here to stay. SGA, his play during the regular season, he backed it up with some really nice playoff performances as well. The shooting around SGA has held up to this point as well. That was one of the questions I had. Would Lou Dort make shots? Would Chet make shots above, like those above the break threes that the Pelicans were trying to give him, let him shoot? They made enough of them. And the other question I had was, can Jalen Williams raise his level? And Jalen Williams meaning J-Dub, their star guard next to SGA. Can he raise his level of play and be a championship level number 2 for this team. And thus far, he has passed every test. I mean, the game one debut of him going, 19 points, 8 rebounds. I don't quite remember how many assists, but the impact is just that he makes on the game is just so much bigger than some of the numbers he puts up sometimes. Like even when he has a game where he, ends up with 12 or 14 points, he leaves his mark on the game with his defense and with just his mentality as well. I just really like this Thunder team. But your thoughts?
Um, yeah, I thought the way that the Thunder, their young players, adjusted to how quickly they just adjusted to playoff basketball was very, very impressive. They struggled in game one shooting the ball in their win over the Pelicans. In that game, it felt like they struggled with initially Valanciunas' size on the interior, which I kind of expected going in. Um, but at the same time, like I feel like they made the necessary adjustments to neutralize him moving forward. You saw the Pelicans kind of go when the Thunder went to their smaller lineups. You saw the Pelicans utilize Larry Nance Jr. more often. Went to their smaller lineups without Zion. Larry Nance Jr. gives you a little bit more floor spacing, the ability to move. He still gives you some defense. Like I thought that was effective from a Pelican standpoint, but I thought what the Thunder did defensively to match that was brilliant. I felt like Mark Daignault, who should be argued as possibly a Coach of the Year candidate, or maybe even the Coach of the Year, did a good job. Like I feel like when you don't have to mention a coach, and I know this was a 1-8, and the Thunder were expected to win this series, but when you really don't have to question any coaching decisions throughout the entirety of a playoff series, when you really don't have to talk about the coaching, it's probably a good thing
Oh yeah,
for the winning team. And I just felt like if I had to, I mean, of course, SGA played well. I thought Jalen Williams played well. I even thought Chet uh, did a very nice job on the interior.
yeah,
But especially going up against some of the bigger players for the Pelicans. But I felt like the guy who really stood out to me and was kind of like an X factor in this particular series, it was Lou Dort and his defense on Brandon Ingram.
yeah,
They put him on Brandon Ingram, and I don't know what happened tonight, but I know in the first three games, um, his defense on Brandon Ingram completely kind of disrupted the flow of that offense. They scored coming into the night. Pelicans were scoring 89.7 points per 100 possessions in this series. Um, Ingram went in games 1 and 2 combined 3 of 13 on field goal attempts when Lou Dort was the primary defender. In game 3, he was 4 and 9, so a little bit better, but not all that much better. Lou Dort did a very nice job of just D'ing him up and shutting him down as much as
yeah,
you can shut Brandon Ingram down. Because we know when Brandon Ingram gets going, he's one of those guys who can be really hard to slow down. I felt like the Pelicans really missed Zion, of course, in this series. I don't know how much the series would have been different had Zion been healthy. But, we saw Zion in that play-in game before he got hurt. He put up, 40 points?
yeah,
So I feel like it probably would have gotten at least a game or two, given how the Thunder were struggling to shoot the ball, especially early on in the series. But who knows? You got to applaud the Thunder. This is at the very least like good experience
yeah.
going into the second
And
round.
the fact that they won game one even without shooting the ball well and not playing well to their standard, I mean, it just shows how legit this team is. Honestly, like it encapsulates them just figuring it out on the fly, just figuring out how to win, just getting it done. And that's what you got to do in the playoffs. Now, the other part of this conversation is the fallout for the Pelicans. Obviously, you weren't able to extend this series enough to have a Zion return, and I don't know if that was even an option either. But now you have some question marks because I think Ingram is up for a new contract. Um, you have some questions with Trey Murphy. I think regardless of whatever happens, I think he has to be in the starting lineup come next year. So whoever you got to move or to down or move out is up to them. But I think Trey Murphy has to start because I see him as a guy who can average 20 points per game, and you can't have that just on your bench when you're a team that had the offensive series that they did this year. Like they really struggled to put the ball in the basket.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much everything you said there. So let's go ahead and move on to our next series, which is moving back to the Eastern Conference, the 4-5 in the East, the Cavs and the Magic. What have you seen from this series, and what adjustments need to be made on either side as it's tied at 2 moving into the last potentially 3 games? Because I think this series could easily go 7 games. I actually right now I'm predicting it to go 7 games. I just have a feeling.
Well, the interesting thing to me is the first 2 games Orlando just couldn't make a shot. Like they were getting the looks, and their offense gets a little bit clunky, but I think that is a little bit overblown. Like they were getting the looks that they wanted for the most part. It's just those outside shots they just were not dropping in Cleveland for whatever reason. I think maybe nerves or whatever the case may be, but even in those 2 games, you could kind of see Orlando kind of finding their footing defensively and what they wanted to do to guard this Cavs team. And once they got to that point, it really just became, when are we going to start hitting shots? And it finally happened. I think Franz hit a corner 3 in the first quarter of that game 3, and then from there it was just clean sailing from there. Like like the shooting luck just kind of evened itself out. It was the same looks that they had gotten that whole time, and they just started dropping. So now we come to game 5, and it's like the Cavs. Like, what adjustments do you make to close out to these shooters? Like, do you maybe be a little bit more deliberate in not rotating to a guy like Gary Harris or not rotating to a guy like Markelle when he's in the game, or some of their less consistent shooters, because there is a few in their rotation that are less consistent, and I think that's one of the things that they will have to change. Their defense, I think, in those times where they were running 2 bigs and they got into rotation, they weren't able to rotate fast enough just because even with the mobility of Mobley and Allen, like you're having to cover a lot of space, and for a couple of bigs, like that is very, very difficult. So I think the Magic did a really good job of spreading them out, and I think the winner of Game 5 wins the series. Right now, I don't really know who I would give the edge to. I think that really would all depend on can the Magic just make their shots, because I think they're generating good offense. I think their defensive imposition and their toughness is on a level above the Cavs, in my opinion, especially for those last couple of games. So I think I would give a slight edge to the Magic, but yet again, the Cavs do have the best player in the series.
Yeah, there's 2 sides of this, which I think you hit on, but I'll just kind of add on to it. The Magic have a elite defense, but they lack a certain punch offensively. And let's start there. They started off this series by scoring 169 total points in the first 2 games in Cleveland. That obviously didn't bode well for them. But their defense, even though they were really struggling to score to the point where I was falling asleep in some of those games, their defense kind of still held the Cavs within reason. Like on all 4 games, and we'll talk about the Cavs' offensive struggles here in a minute, they've held the Cavs below 100 points. Like their defense is just really good.
Yeah.
The last 2 games, in Orlando have been different. They've kind of found more of a rhythm offensively. They scored a total of 233 points over games 3 and 4. And their star players had more kind of superhero level performances. In game 3, you saw Paulo really get into a rhythm, scoring 31 points in just 3 quarters. In game 4, you saw Franz Wagner, as you mentioned, score 34 points on 76% shooting. And these are the performances that I think moving into game 5 and potentially down the road in this series, they're going to need. And if they can get 1 or 2 of these guys to play really, really well with their defense, I feel like they could win this series. I really do. I feel like I'm right there with you. I kind of favor them at this point. Like they went down 2-0. They tied it back up. I feel like they have the momentum. They found something offensively. And on the other side of the spectrum, and look, he can make me look pretty stupid really fast. But Donovan Mitchell is struggling offensively. And it feels like the Cavs aren't getting him quite as involved as I feel like he should be. They haven't scored more than 100 points in any of their games. Again, some of that is accredited to Orlando. In game 3, he scored just 13 points. Not good enough. Game 4, he finished with 18 points and went scoreless in the second half. Not good enough from your best player. So they're going to need whatever it is, get him coming off more screens. I don't know what it is, but he's going to have to find a way to create separation from Jalen Suggs, who's done a very good job of hounding him in this series. He held, in fact, Jalen Suggs should be mentioned here. He held Donovan Mitchell to 1 of 6 with 3 turnovers in game 4 when he was the primary defender. That's awesome. You've kind of seen Jalen Suggs really come on in this series, which is big for the Magic, especially on defense. But going back to the Cavs before we move on, like, I don't know what it is, but their starting backcourt is really struggling. At one point in the game, they gave up a 50-15 run in game 4 against the Magic. And most of their second half possessions in that game when I was watching were sloppy mistakes, bad ball movement, ill-advised shot attempts, sloppy offense. They just look kind of ill-prepared. And it doesn't help that a lot of their guys, a lot of their mainstays on offense are struggling from 3 in this series. Donovan Mitchell was a 36.8% three-point shooter this season. He's shooting 25% so far in this series from 3. Max Strus was a 35% three-point shooter in this series, or in the regular season. He's shooting 17.6% in this series. Gorgeous Niang was a 37.6% three-point shooter in the regular season. He's shooting 0.91% in this series. Karis LeVert was a 32.5% three-point shooter in the regular season. Not great, but he's shooting 23% in this series. So they need to start making shots. They need to figure out something offensively. They need to get Donovan Mitchell back on track. I don't know how you do that. I'm not a basketball coach for a reason. But it's not going to be easy to do it against this Magic defense. They seem to have it down packed. And I feel like if Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, and a couple of these other guys can contribute in a couple games offensively, I feel like they can win. I feel like they'll win the series. I'm leading Magic, actually.
Yeah, and for the Magic, it's all gravy, man. Like the pressure is really on the Cavs right now. They tanked so that they could have this series because they felt like this matchup was better. And to be fair, I mean, you don't want to face the 76ers first round. You don't really want to face the Heat in the first round. But, I mean, this is definitely – if they lose this series, it would definitely mean a lot of different questions. Probably – that would probably mean JB Bickerstaff is probably out the door, and Donovan Mitchell, his status in terms of re-signing would be in question as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's touch on this series quickly because on the back end of this episode, we have some more of the juicier series to talk about, including your Mavs. We've got the Sixers Bucks, and I still believe we have Sixers Knicks. But let's talk about Celtics Heat really fast. The Celtics won tonight. They won both games in Miami after going down after the Heat tied the series in game 2 by making a record 23 3-pointers in that game. But it kind of feels like aside from that game, it's been all kind of this series has been controlled by Boston as kind of I thought we would have expected. But your quick takeaways from what you've seen in this series.
Well, I think Boston, their team is fantastic. I mean, they have like they're in terms of roster talent. You're not going to find a better, first 6 players on their roster than in Boston, and even then you could add in Peyton Pritchard as a guy who's giving you a spark off the bench, possibly giving you 10, 12 points on any given night, and basically a shoe in for a couple threes. Sam Hauser as well is giving you really good minutes. I think the Celtics team, I mean, it's championship or bust. It's pretty clear. But the games that we always talk about with them are the ones like game 2 where they just have a lack of focus on the defensive end. And it just felt like they were kind of baited a little bit in game 2. Like they really overhelped on a lot of those drives. Then those Heat shooters, are shooting wide open shots from 3 because they're not able to close out in time. And then all of a sudden they get hot because they're NBA players too. And then all of a sudden you're in trouble because you can't get a stop. I just didn't love that approach. I mean, to me, like make Tyler Hero hit, 15 shots over the top in the mid range. Like make Jaime Jaquez. If that beats you, then so be it. But you can't allow the entire team to just empty the clip on your defense. Like that just cannot happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, tonight, since it's the most recent thing that we can talk about, we knew this Heat offense would struggle without Jimmy Butler, without Terry Rozier. Because even with those guys, in the regular season, they were average to below average in terms
Yeah,
of
I think bottom
offensive
10
rating.
offense in terms of
Yeah,
rating.
21st in the regular season. So we knew that was going to be an issue. We knew if they could shoot the ball well and they could get Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero really get going, they could hang possibly. But their shooting struggles continue tonight. Like only scoring 88 points on just 40% shooting, 9 of 33 from three. It just felt like after game two, they probably weren't going to have another shooting night like they had in that particular game. And they've been sloppy in both games at home. They committed 15 turnovers tonight. And so they're struggling offensively. It was interesting because I believe, let's see, um, Kristaps Porzingis on the Celtics side, he left in the second quarter with some calf tightness, and he didn't come back. So they had Al Horford out there, and he finished by contributing in a lot of different categories, as you would expect Al Horford to, as he's kind of a grizzled veteran in postseason. But on the other side, Jaime Jaquez Jr., he left with an injury in this game. I believe he left and did not return with a right hip injury. And he's been classified as day to day. Now, I don't know when game 5 is, but that's not great for a Heat team that's very low on options offensively. Like he'd probably be third or fourth right now on the totem pole of guys that you go to offensively for the Heat. But yeah, I mean, it really just comes down to not having, it's not having enough, right? Even like I felt like the Celtics lost game 2, and yes, you don't want to lose that game, and it brings up concerns for later on in the postseason when they go up against more stiff competition. But I feel like this one's going to be wrapped up here pretty soon, whenever game 5 is. The Celtics just need to maintain their focus on the defensive end of the floor, and not get too complacent offensively, especially in the fourth quarter. I feel like some of their shot selection can get a little carried away sometimes. I know they have a ton of great shooters. We saw Derek White really have his coming out party tonight. 38 points, made 8 threes. So that's great. That's a great sign for them moving forward. But those are really the two things. Like occasionally some stagnant half court offense late in games in clutch situations, and then just lack of focus sometimes. But other than that, like there's a clear talent advantage between Boston and everyone else in the East.
Yeah, and your stars got to be stars too. Like they're getting that from Derek White tonight. Like that's a bonus, and like that just shows how great this team is. But also, I think just big picture to get for them where they want to go, which is winning that ring. Tatum and Brown have to be the guys. So we'll see what happens with them. But let's move on.
Yeah, so let me look at what we have next. I believe what we have next is look at my list. Number 5, Sixers Knicks. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Man, this Knicks team is like if you if you grabbed all of the 90s style players in today's NBA and put them all on one roster, what would happen? And then had them coached by Tom Thibodeau. Every loose ball, every offensive rebound. It's like they're just getting after it. They're just tough. It's gritty. I just don't think the Sixers have the fight to hang with them. Like that's the bottom line to it. And you know what? Like the Sixers, like you can say what you want about their offense. Like I think their half court offense, the Sixers, is better than what the Knicks can provide in the half court on their offensive side. But the disparity in terms of what your role players are giving you, in terms of the hustle plays, the 50-50 balls, just the grittiness, like all those buzzwords that people like to use when talking about 90s basketball, like those all describe the Knicks right now. And the Sixers, it just feels like, I mean, it's a combination of a ton of different things, but they haven't been able to match that physicality at all, and that's been the difference. It's also helped that Jalen Brunson, he's gotten better throughout this series as well. Like once you got 2 games into the series, game 3 he comes out, he's like, okay, you're gonna give me this switch I want. Okay, Josh Hart comes set me a ball screen. I'm gonna get Kyle Lowry on me or whoever it is on me, and I'm just gonna go to work, flow into a ball screen.
Yeah.
Those types of things, like they found out how to best attack the Sixers, and once you do that, that's when a series typically, is over.
Yeah, I love watching this Knicks team. I know it's not the most like eye-popping style of basketball that you would want to watch, but there's something about it, man. Like, first of all, I don't know if there's a better match of player, coach, and city than there is New York,
Yeah,
Jalen Brunson, and Tom Thibodeau. I
agreed.
feel like it's just a perfect trio. Um, and look, I mean, give credit to Jalen Brunson. I feel like, and look, I'm a big college basketball fan, but I feel like some of this is just basketball character that's been built up throughout the years. Coming through a great program in Villanova, coached by Jay Wright, winning national championships, going through the
His
ups and
father
downs.
being in the NBA too. Yeah, just
Exactly. Just having
fundamentals.
the basketball background, as you mentioned, and then coming from winning, uh, coming, developing in Dallas, becoming a star, and then taking over a city. And he struggled from an offensive standpoint for a guy that's probably going to be second team All NBA here in, sooner rather than later whenever they announce that. I expect him to be that. He shot 16 of 55, 29% from the field in the first 2 games. But he responded with a very impressive game 3 and 47 points in what was an awesome performance that I'll remember for a long, long time
Yeah,
in game 4.
masterclass.
He's put the Knicks on the verge of winning playoff series back-to-back years for the first time since 2000. I feel like you mentioned the role players. I feel like Isaiah Hartenstein, he's had some huge moments in this series, just like doing the dirty work down low. He's come up with a couple huge rebounds, loose balls, as you mentioned. I feel like he was the guy that after Josh Hart, I believe it was, shot the 3 in, I think it was, I can't remember which game, the game that the Sixers really just screwed up.
Game
Um,
2.
Game 2, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, Hartenstein was the guy that came up with that 50-50 loose ball and then kicked it right back out to DiVincenzo. Like, that's the kind of thing that he's been giving them this entire series. The rebounding, the doing the dirty work. You talk about Dante DiVincenzo. You talk about Josh Hart. Um, just bring up anybody. Like, I think it was in game 4 when Hartenstein picked up some early fouls. They brought in Precious Achua, who gave them good, effective minutes. I just feel like they're a team that you may not love watching, but you hate to play against them because they're a pain in the ass.
yeah,
But
they're yeah. For
that's
for guys like us, like we love it. Like
yeah. I mean, we like it.
it's a basketball nerds
We
team.
love it. I
Yeah,
love watching them. But the they're not a Instagram, TikTok team.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and so I feel like for that part of the basketball world, they might not really understand it. But it's effective, it's working, and I can guarantee you this: like, whoever they're going to play next, they're the 2 seed, right? So they're probably going to play
the Pacers.
the Pacers.
Yeah,
That'll be interesting. We'll talk about the Pacers here soon, but the Pacers probably aren't going to love to play the Knicks,
yeah.
right? I
And
mean,
shout out to Isaiah Hartenstein, man.
yeah,
He's about to get a bag this summer.
that
Hopefully, he'll stay with the Knicks, but some team is gonna offer him big money.
that physicality, like, you don't want to fuck with that.
Yeah, no, I don't know.
But on the Sixers side, like, what are your thoughts there? They really fumbled away a game they should have won. But thoughts on Embiid, how he's looked, what the Sixers need to do to potentially they're now down 3-1. They basically kind of flubbed away, in my opinion, their chances of winning this series. But what do you think?
Yeah, yeah. I think for them to have had any shot to win this series, it had to come with efficient offense on their part, and they haven't been able to reach that level consistently enough. As I think is the bottom line, and some of that is credit to the Knicks defense, and some of that is, I think, um, just the Knicks have kind of baited the Sixers into some of their worst tendencies. Having Embiid have catch it, all the way on the left wing almost, like not even the left block, but the left wing, and having him try to, back down with a double team coming, and some of the, positioning and getting Embiid into his spots, like it's just not happening. So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more creativity from them, getting Embiid more in the middle of the floor, more on the elbows, maybe the free throw line area. But I think the bottom line is they just didn't match the physicality of the Knicks. And one thing I did want to point out is in Game 4, late in that game, the decision to keep Kyle Lowry on the floor. And as much as I love Kyle Lowry, it just was a really bad situation for him, because you're having, the 2-man game of Brunson and Hardenstein, right? They're running their pick and roll, and you have Embiid up at the level, and you have Kelly Oubre on the ball. And that leaves on the backside, you're expecting Lowry, Tobias Harris, and Maxey to clean the boards for you, that's just too much to ask. You're asking, you're asking Lowry to box out OG Anunoby, which is just, I mean, Lowry's going to give you his best effort, which is the type of player that he is and his basketball character, but it's just more times than not, he's not going to get that rebound just because he's just outmatched. So I would have liked to have seen Batum in that situation, just for a little bit more size on the floor. But it's nitpicky. I think the Knicks just were the better team.
Yes, they are. For the Sixers, we saw in Game 4 on yesterday, by the end of it, like, Embiid, who's coming off the knee injury, 2 months on the bench, he just looked completely drained to
Yeah,
me at the end. And he didn't sit for a second in the second half of that game. He played 44 minutes, and he was just kind of lethargic, protecting the rim, getting rebounds, finishing the types of shots that he typically makes with ease. Um, he obviously isn't playing up to his peak, but even with that being said, like, the Sixers have seen really good results with him on the court. They're plus 34 in 160 minutes in the series with Embiid on the floor. But when he's off the floor, the story is far different. It's like two different stratospheres of offensive compatibility. Um, they've been a minus 37 in the 32 minutes he's been off the court.
Yeah.
So you can obviously see the difference there. But you know, they're just not getting the contributions they need from Tobias Harris in his kind of bloated contract. That is, not enough production. Buddy Hield hasn't
Tobias
been.
Harris over me?
Yeah.
I love that
Um,
clip from Jimmy Butler. It's so funny.
Buddy
Tobias
Hield,
Harris over me?
yeah, Buddy Hield hasn't yielded the results that they thought he would when they acquired him at the deadline. And though Tyrese Maxey has been great when Embiid is on the floor, he's posted a 60% effective field goal percentage with Embiid on the floor. He's 34% when Embiid's off the floor. So it's just kind of like, I don't know. But at the same time, they haven't been great defensively either. Their defensive rating has ballooned to a 124.2 in their minutes without Embiid on the court. And I don't want to pick on one guy, but the drop off from Embiid to Paul Reed has been pretty dramatic. Their defense is allowing 46% of shots in the paint with Embiid on the floor and almost 64% of shots with Reed on the floor in the paint. Because the Knicks just don't have a lot of fear with Paul Reed protecting the rim. Shaky perimeter defense isn't making life easy on Paul Reed, to be fair. But he just doesn't have the size of the length to deter drives. And I don't know what you do about that, but I feel like at this point it's kind of too late. Now, the good news for Philly is, even though it's not quite over yet, is I think they do, as opposed to Phoenix, like they do have hope in the
Yeah.
offseason.
Yep.
They've got $60 million in cap space, a plethora of draft picks via the James Harden deal that they can use to help them surround Embiid and Maxey with the right pieces. I feel like they'll probably go after someone like Paul George to add shot creation from the wing, which I feel like they need. But it might be I don't know if he's going to leave Los Angeles. We will see. Could they go after DeMar DeRozan, Miles Bridges? I'm just throwing out names, but that's off-season talk. So with all that being said, that's really the Sixers. And it's I don't know the word that I'm looking for here. It's weird to think about because they were on pace for 65 wins when Embiid and Maxey were healthy this season. And that injury was unfortunate. So let's talk about your Mavs. You went to the game yesterday. It's time for you to just take the floor and talk about it. The good and the bad.
Okay, so first of all, we lost the game, but that game, and it hurt in the moment, but that game was so worth going to, just in terms of I got to see, 4 Hall of Famers on the floor and 3 of them just having their absolute A game on a given night. And it was a old school, just Dawkins duel highlight tape. I mean, just ridiculous shot making from both sides, an insane comeback. Mavs went down 31, and I mean, I've heard a lot of from JJ Redick's podcast and a lot of other places just giving credit to us Mavs fans because we held it down even when we were down 25. So shout out to us. But I mean, the energy in the arena in the playoffs, like it's just you can't put words on it, man. Like it's incredible. Like I just so glad I got to go. Now the series as a whole tied at 2-2 right now, and we currently don't know the status of Kawhi Leonard. But I
Yep.
think to talk about that game, like that is just a huge win for the Clippers, but not just um from the standpoint of this series, but just from an organizational standpoint. Because if you look at the history of the Clippers franchise and
Mhm.
you see them have a lead like that, what do you think of?
Yeah.
2015 game 6,
Yeah.
2020 game 6. You know, there's not a lot of happy memories of
Nope.
Clippers holding and closing games, big
Mhm.
games. So for them to close this one out was a really big deal, in my opinion. So credit to them. James Harden was fantastic. Paul George was ridiculous
Yes.
throughout this game. Despite you know, I heard a funny quote from Bill Simmons. He described Paul George as like a lovable cat. That's
Yeah.
like uh,
Yep.
he'll sit in your lap like, oh, here's Paul George, and then next minute you're like, oh, where's Paul George? He's in the garage. And he kind of had all that in this game. Like in the third quarter, he wasn't really scoring much, and then all of a sudden the fourth quarter comes around, and he's, that turnaround. Well, it wasn't really a turnaround, but that fadeaway over Derrick Jones from the corner over
Yeah.
the side of the backboard.
Yeah.
That is the most insane shot I've ever seen live. Just and second to it is of course Kyrie's layup that he hit to take the lead in this game too. So just incredible game, and I think both sides can take positives from it. Honestly, I think Game 5 is just going to be an absolute dogfight.
The shot creation in that game, especially in the second half, the layup packages by Kyrie Irving,
Yeah,
the shots that Paul George was making, the step back threes, the shot that you mentioned in the corner that he hit to really put a stamp on it yesterday afternoon. Luka doing what Luka does. Like it was almost like if you were to invent porn for basketball, that's what that was
yeah,
yesterday.
yeah,
And I mean, Bill Simmons is spot on. That guy watches a ton of basketball, and he comes up with the best analogies. I love
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Um, and he's
He
right. Like,
called Cat the leader in weirdness per 36.
oh
Oh
man,
man.
I love listening to that podcast. Anyways, where do I want to take this? I totally forget. Um, look, I mean, it's tied 2-2. Now it becomes a 3-game series, and I feel like the status. What is the status of Kawhi? Like he's probably Game 3's on Wednesday. Game 5's on Wednesday, so he's probably game time decision. I don't know.
I
Um,
don't know if we're gonna see him again. I
yeah, I don't know.
the version of Kawhi that we saw in Game 3, like him going up for that dunk and then not wanting to land. That's scary, man. That if I'm the Clippers, I don't even want to put him back out there. Like, and also the fact that the hierarchy is a little bit more clear, when you don't have the factor of a not 100% Kawhi in there trying to reintegrate. Um, so I think you just, if you're the Clippers, you just take your chances. I think you have a good flow going, and the thing that like the biggest um you know gap that they biggest advantage that they have is Tyronn Lue, in my opinion. I mean, I think Tyronn Lue has just been coaching circles around Jason Kidd this series. I really do believe that. And it feels like the Mavericks have been the better team for the majority of this series, but other than two stretches, the beginning of game 1 and the beginning of game 4, those two stretches just so happen to be just like catastrophically bad.
Yes.
And so to get into it a little bit, I thought the decision to not play Gafford or Lively in the final minutes of that fourth quarter, I thought was tough to watch. Let's just say that. Maxi Kleba, I think, like you're just putting him in a rough spot. Having to like what your your game plan is to let James Harden get to his right hand, so you're allowing dribble penetration, and then you're also not going to put the subsequent rim protection on the floor to make up for that. Like that just it just doesn't make sense to me at all. And James Harden did the smart thing and just took what we were giving him and making those floaters over and over again and just said good luck. And that was frustrating. That was definitely really frustrating. The other thing is, on a non-Jason Kidd note, Luka is not right now.
Yeah.
Seeing it live, there was definitely there's things that we call Luka boo boos in the Mavs community. Like when Luka, gets like hit weird and he kind of falls on the ground. He's like, my elbow, and then he gets back on offense and he just like nails a three, and then you just forget about it. We call it a Luka boo boo. Like it's not an actual injury, but this one is real. This is scary. He's like him like fiddling with the knee brace, and it's something right knee related that he tweaked in game 3, and he didn't have the lift on his jumper. He was missing a lot of shots short, even in warmups. I got there early and watched him warm up. He just didn't look comfortable at any point, really. And it's, it's weird saying that because he got, a 29-point triple-double or whatever it was, but he wasn't himself.
Yeah.
And in order for the Mavs to win this series, I just think he's got to be the best player on the floor with no Kawhi. The Mavs community has talked about, Luka being the possible MVP of the league this season. And, what Kai did in those second and third quarters, picking up the slack, getting the team back in it. That's a moment where in the fourth, like Luka goes to Kai, like, thanks for the help, but I take it from here. Like that's what MVPs do. Like that's what Jokic does. That's what Shea has done to an extent too. Tatum, all those top guys in the league, that's what they do. So seeing him kind of gimpy like this in a big moment, like it's disheartening for sure.
Yeah. Not a whole lot else to add. I mean, you got 40 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists from Kyrie. Luka with his 29-point triple double, 10 rebounds, 10 assists.
They were just left walk to a 29 triple double.
I know.
Triple double.
He's that great of a player. And look, when we talk about these great players, like Luka's probably going to be an all-time great player, but we talk about them with a more fine-tooth comb. And I feel like, he's just kind of struggling a little bit shooting the ball right now. And you could see that, glass half empty or glass half full. I kind of see it glass half full. I feel like he's going to find it, especially with a couple of days off.
I agree.
But through the first 4 games, he just hasn't been quite himself. And that's not to say, he's been awful, but 38% from the floor and 26% from beyond the arc. Just some shooting struggles that I think he'll work through. And if he does and he becomes the best player on the floor, well, you're getting strong performances from, say, a Derrick Jones Jr., who had 14 points in yesterday's game, PJ Washington, 10 points. got to clean up some of the turnovers. They were very sloppy, turned it over 16 times earlier on in that game yesterday. Shot just 11 of 33 from beyond the arc. But I don't know. Where are you leaning? Just a quick prediction before we get to the last two series. Where are you leaning on?
I think I lean Clippers. I think you know the Terrence Mann matchup on Luca has worked really well this series. I think the defense, the job that he's done on Luca has been really really good. And I think what they showed offensively in Game 4, I think to a certain extent that is sustainable, and not the tough shot making in the second half, but I think the reason the tough shot making came in the second half is because they were able to get their guys in the rhythm in the first, and by attacking the basket and getting Paul George open on you know floppy and screen action, getting him downhill. Once that was established, then you open it up with your guys already in rhythm. So I lean Clippers just because I think Tyronn Lue has his guys on a little bit more of a detailed game plan, and I think they're a little bit more dialed in on their keys, like just with the little things. Like, for example, Norman Powell. They run one play with Norman Powell with him running off of a screen, and the Mavs don't top lock it. They don't switch it. They just let him run free around that screen and get to his right hand, which the scouting report is like you do not want that scenario to happen, and that like they're giving him that. So that like those little types of things is where I give the Clippers the edge, like the little details.
Okay. We got to move on now.
Yeah, sorry.
Spoiler alert. Um, the Nuggets have defeated the Los Angeles Lakers in 5 games, 4-1. They won tonight for the second time this series on a go-ahead shot by Jamal Murray with
Bruh.
3.5 seconds left. As they knock out LeBron James from the playoffs for the second consecutive year, 108-106 in Game 5. James hit 2 free throws to tie it at 106 with 26 seconds left. And the Nuggets, just as they did in Game 2, Murray took the ball in a high screen and roll to his left, shook Austin Reeves. I already watched it. Switched to a 14-foot jumper. Just as kind of he did in Game 2. Nikola Jokic actually had 7 turnovers tonight, which is uncharacteristic for him. He narrowly missed his 19th career playoff triple-double by 1 assist, 25 points, 20 rebounds, and 9 assists. But Michael Porter Jr. had a big game with 26 points, and Jamal Murray comes up big with 32, including the go-ahead series clinching jumper. LeBron James finished with 30 points and 11 assists, and Anthony Davis had 17 points and 15 rebounds. But overall, like, the Nuggets are moving on to face the Minnesota Timberwolves in the second round series, which should be a fantastic series.
Oh yeah.
But first, we got to talk about this Denver Nuggets Lakers series. What are your takeaways?
Well, I think the main thing to take away is I just think the Nuggets are not a good matchup for the Lakers. If that wasn't proven already by them winning 11 in a row against them or whatever it was, but just simply, it's just not a good matchup. If you think of the Lakers, the way that team is built, their advantage is in having a Anthony Davis and LeBron James front court. Like most of the time, they can find their way to the basket and dominate in the paint with those two guys. Um, the problem with that is your best two players are your two most, physically imposing players,
Yes.
and you end up putting a lot on their plate. And the other three guys in their starting lineup, Austin Reeves, and D'Lo, they're not able to match the physicality that guys like KCP, Aaron Gordon, and even
Yep.
Michael Porter Jr. are able to bring on the glass, on 50-50 balls, and even you know, um, just in the little details as well. Like they have trouble matching that. And whenever you just have that as the issue, it's just really difficult to overcome. And to be fair, the Lakers did, they led a lot of this series. They even led a lot of this game five. Like when I checked earlier, they were up 8 or whatever it was. I think the difference is the Nuggets, they are who they are because of how they execute in the closing minutes of games. They are nearly impossible to beat in clutch time. I mean, their 2-man game of Murray and Jokic. I mean, it's like a superpower in itself. Like there's just no stopping it. Like you're picking between who you want to, like what you want to give up at that point.
Yeah. This was expected. No surprise in the result of the series at all. The Lakers did get a game. Give credit to them for game 4. I I don't even want to do this because it's the Denver Nuggets, and if they play as they should play, as we said in our way too early playoff preview, like I don't know if there's anyone that can beat them. I don't think there is. I think even Boston would struggle. But coming into tonight, and I won't speak for tonight because I didn't watch a lot of that game, but they, as you mentioned, there were some cracks. Like you could see some cracks in the larger nature of this series against the Lakers.
Yeah.
In this Nuggets potential title defense. And it's not yelling fire in a crowded theater. It's not pointing out some big flaw or big chasm that's going to prevent them from from going back to back, from winning this year's finals, which I think they will do. But like as you mentioned, there were some developments that potentially revealed a couple cracks in the foundation. Number one is they fell behind a lot in this series, and part of that was just not struggling a little bit offensively. But coming into tonight, they trailed on 3/4 of their offensive possessions in this round against the Lakers. That put them near the bottom of all 16 playoff squads. The only teams that trailed on a higher percentage of their offensive series coming into tonight were the Heat, the Pelicans, and the Suns. Suns and Pelicans got swept. So the difference between those teams and the Nuggets is obviously, number one, they have an all-time great in Nikola Jokic, who's fantastic, just does it night after night. And as you mentioned, come when it matters most, the Nuggets get the job done, and they're able to do it.
Like
But
it feels inevitable.
it does. Like their late game offense, their motor late in games, how they're able to come back from a deficit. Um, it's very impressive. But you'd rather, as they did in this series, not have to come back in every single game, especially when you face some better teams than the Lakers. I guess other than that, like coming into tonight, Jamal Murray, the state of his health, I guess. He was questionable for game 5 with a calf strain. He hadn't really played all that great in the first round uh, compared to what he has done in previous playoff runs, but um, he's been efficient scoring in the clutch. He has picked up his performance when the game has been in the balance, and that's been great for them. But and of course, he really stepped up tonight. Like, you know, his stats against the Lakers coming in to tonight: 22 points, 7 assists, 5 rebounds per game, with that dramatic buzzer beater in game 2. Um, you know, only 4 other players in the first round, Jokic, LeBron, Jalen Brunson, and Luka, are averaging 27 and 5. So even with like his okay play, because I wouldn't call that like what I expect from Jamal Murray in the playoffs, they've still been able to get out of these games late. Because his underlying numbers looked much worse coming into the night. He was shooting just 38% from the field and 21% from 3. And out of 47 players with at least 40 shot attempts in the first round, Jamal Murray ranked 46 in true shooting percentage coming into tonight. And yet the Nuggets just still get the job done. And Jokic is a big reason why. Like, he's already one of the greatest playoff performers in NBA history. And he continues to produce at that pace, even with kind of a shaky performance tonight. Like, he does it all, but he can't do it all on his own. And Murray is like been crucial, especially late in games. Like that 2-man game in crunch time, it's like, what do you do? I don't know. But in terms of how these two teams match up in the second round, and quickly, because we got to wrap this thing up here fairly soon. Nuggets and T-Wolves, what are you looking for?
This is the matchup that I'm most looking forward to, maybe in this entire playoffs. Like, this is going to be an incredible series. I can just feel it. Like, this has the feel of Spurs and OKC in 2016. Like, you have a former champion and then kind of a team that hasn't quite gotten over the hump. I know that at that point OKC had been together longer than this Minnesota team, but same type of thing, where I think Minnesota matches up with Denver really, really well.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're meeting in the second round, that's probably the only caveat to this. I would have liked to have seen them meet in the conference finals, but so be it. So the dynamic that I'm most interested to see is what the Timberwolves do with Aaron Gordon. Um, the you know the assumption is that they're going to put Gobert on Gordon to kind of take away some of those lobs that he kills so many other teams with, and then allow Gobert to roam a little bit because of Gordon's lack of shooting this year. But that's going to be really interesting because we already know, like, with how smart Jokic is going to have counters. He's going to maybe get with Gobert kind of sitting, all the way down in the paint, kind of catch him with maybe some DHOs, getting Gordon involved in the action. I think both teams are going to be able to guard each other really well. I think it's just going to come down to execution in the fourth quarter, and that's why I give Denver the edge, because there's just not a team better right now.
Nope.
I will say, though, if Anthony Edwards plays the way he's been playing, I give the Timberwolves a real shot of not only winning this series, but winning it all. And I would not have said that a week and a half ago.
Yeah. Just a quick cool stat here. As we know, Jamal Murray hit the game-winning go-ahead shot in both Game 2 and Game 5. He's the first player in the last 25 seasons with multiple go-ahead field goals in the final 5 seconds of a single playoff series.
Wow.
So
Wow.
there's a cool thing for you. Playoff Murray is real, especially late in games.
Yeah.
Even when you think he's just doesn't have it, he can flip a switch. And that high screen, that 2-man game, the high screen and roll, I don't know what you do with that if you're Minnesota. I'll be interested to see what they do with that. But
I
they
think
do
they
have,
are equipped to
yeah,
handle it better than most, though, for sure. I think
yeah,
with McDaniels, his
mhm.
screen navigation, it'll be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I'm interested to see because, like, I feel like if there's any team that is equipped to deal with it, maybe better than others, it would be their personnel. Let's finish this thing out with our last series, which would be the Pacers and the Bucks.
Mm.
The Bucks are in a tough spot right now. They were without Giannis coming in. They're now without Dame with the I think it's an Achilles strain or something
Yeah.
along those
Yeah.
lines.
Don't want to mess with that.
It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially at this stage in his career. Um, like, what are you feeling? Do you think Indiana can get this done in 5 if Dame isn't playing? Or
Yeah.
what?
I think so. I think not to take anything away from the Pacers, but to me the most intriguing part of this series is the fallout from the Bucks, and we'll get into that at a different time. But the lack of offensive creation outside of Damon and Middleton is just it's glaring. Um, you know when the other three guys on the floor at all times are really just spot up shooters, and that's really all they do. The defense just knows that, and they can play for that. And the Bucks, I just think, for all of the coaching stuff that you want to throw out with them switching coaches and all that type of stuff, and obviously Doc Rivers, his reputation or whatever. But the bottom line is, I just don't think they had the personnel to get it done this year. So I think off season you regroup. To me, the best course of action would probably be to move on from Brook Lopez and have Giannis play the 5 a little bit more and have him be the low man, rim protector, and kind of move from there. But yeah, I think you got to give the Pacers credit. Pascal has been fantastic. He has absolutely cooked whatever the Bucks have thrown at him, and that's been the silver lining. Tyrese hasn't been the Super Saiyan scorer that we saw early in the season, but he's made an impact for sure. And the Pacers' pace, no pun intended, it's been too much for the Bucks. The Bucks haven't really defended all that well.
Yeah. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to add to that. Um, I feel like at times the Bucks have leaned, maybe out of necessity, but they've leaned a little too heavily on Jay Crowder, Pat Connaughton, and Malik Beasley. I feel like when you've seen Andre Jackson and AJ Green in the game, some good things have tended to happen. But again, like without either way, without Dame and Giannis, they really have no shot. Um, Those guys I think are young. The guys I just mentioned, AJ Green and Andre Jackson. But I think their youthful energy adds some punch to this
Yeah.
Bucks kind of aging core. So maybe you trust them a little bit more in game 5. Maybe play them a little bit more just to see what you can get out of those guys to maybe in an attempt to do whatever you can to push this to a game 6. But I saw earlier it's doubtful that Dame and Giannis play game 5. It's probably not going to happen. I wouldn't risk it um, if you're the Bucks. But yeah, I don't. I guess this is the way that things tend to play out when you lose your two guys that you built this team around. The Bucks just feel a little too old to me. They're
Yeah.
Brook Lopez is 36. He's not really what he used to be a couple years ago. Damian Lillard's 33. He's got now a pretty extensive injury history. Chris Middleton's 32. Doesn't have the same step that he had a couple years ago. And Giannis, although
He's about
he's
to be
still
30.
right in his prime, he's going to be 30 come next season.
So,
So I do feel like it kind of comes down to who's going to end up running the team next year. Mark Stein had a report a couple weeks ago that the Pistons and maybe some other teams would have an interest in hiring the Bucks general manager John Horst to their front office and their basketball operations. We'll see where that goes. Um, the playoffs had yet to begin then. It was a while back. And that report didn't exactly predict that anything will happen. But there have been league sources out there that think there's a possibility that the Bucks general manager, John Horst, could potentially take another job. And if that happens, who's going to be the next general manager? And what do they decide? What direction do they decide to go with this team? Because, as I mentioned, it's an older core. I feel like odds are that they try to run it back with Giannis, Dame, Middleton, and maybe Lopez. I feel like Lopez is the real wild card there.
yeah.
But there aren't really too many other options because they don't have a lot of assets. They don't have a lot of cap space. They don't have a ton of picks. And so there's a lot of work to be done to give Giannis another chance to win a championship. But at the same time, like there's not a lot of ammo to get that work done. It doesn't seem like. So we'll see where it goes with Milwaukee. They're a very well-run organization, but they have some questions to
Yeah.
answer in the offseason. I feel like I want to see more of this Pacers team moving forward. Um, we'll see. They'll match up with the Knicks in the second round, you said. So we'll
Yep.
see how that goes. We will see how that goes.
Yep.
Um,
We shall
okay.
see. And you never see the Bucks getting the 50-50 balls that the Knicks do. I'll just
Yeah.
end it with that.
Okay. Well, man, that was a fruitful podcast. We covered a lot there.
Oh yeah.
I feel like what I'll do sometime this week, in the next couple of days, is go back and try to timestamp where we talked about each series. I feel like this will be kind of a weekly recurrence moving forward all the way until the end of the playoffs. So we'll do an NBA episode a week, maybe 2 if we can fit it in some weeks. Moving forward, just reactions to the playoffs because previews kind of have a short shelf life in the playoffs, especially when things are just going on.
Right.
So we'll be doing this. And they won't be quite as long as now.
Right.
We had planned to do this earlier on in the week or last week. Didn't quite get around to it, so we just had more to talk about. But thank you guys for tuning in, especially if you're the one viewer who's still around. at almost 12:30 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. And we'll if you don't have any other parting shots, I mean, I guess my parting shot would be we're potentially going to have, or we're going to have a second round of the NBA playoffs without LeBron James, Anthony Davis,
Steph
either,
Curry.
Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, either Kyrie Irving, Luka Doncic, or Paul George, Kawhi Leonard. Like, it's just kind of Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker. It's still going to make for a great run in the
Yeah.
playoffs, but it's just kind of weird to think about. Anything else?
No, I think you hit it. Yeah, we're gonna have some new talent on the scene, man. This Pacers team in particular, definitely, or even the Magic if they make it. Like we're
Yeah.
gonna have some
New blood.
definitely some new stars on the scene, man, making a name for themselves, which I always love to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, with that being said, we've got more coming this week, so be on the lookout. Um, Potentially a Major League Baseball episode, and then a couple dit holes that will be coming within the next 4 to 5 days. So keep an eye out for that. And until next week, when we talk some more NBA playoff basketball, have a great night and peace out.